Hello and welcome to our February 7th IWWG open mic. It is my pleasure to be hosting you tonight for the Guild. I'm Kelly Dumar and I'm on the board of the International Women's Writing Guild. I'm so pleased to have our featured writer in memoir, Dolores Johnson, here with us tonight from Cambridge, Massachusetts. And of course, I'm also appreciating our own Katarina Konen, also from the International Women's Writing Guild board, who's here tonight and available to help us with the open mic. Very much appreciating each and every one of you who have either signed up for the reading list for your 3 minutes of reading, or you're here to listen. And we love that you've come to listen because it's great to have an audience and to have you all gathering, members and non-members far and wide. We keep the chat room open. Please feel free, as you always do, to say hello to each other, to say, oh my gosh, I love that line. When you're sharing about someone's reading, what you appreciate, what you resonate with. And I'll be sharing in the chat room the information for buying Dolores's book and how to contact her and find out more information about her wonderful book. And Katarina will be, I'm going to give Katarina a chance to give us a preview and run through the list of the open mic presenters for tonight. And just with the quick reminder that we do go by 3 minutes max, and I actually do time the readings, and I do have to cut you off at 3 minutes. And just what I always say, this is not personal. We love your voice. We want to hear your voice, but we do respect the time limits. And again, it's reading in poetry, prose, memoir, drama, whatever genre you're writing in, you're welcome here. But please stick to 3 minutes. And if I do have to cut you off, just remember, we want you to come back and we definitely want to hear you again. All right. So if you start to go over time, it's really helpful if you record yourself, which I always do before the open mic, and you record yourself. It's nice to practice your reading, but then you can also tell by your own timer whether or not you're going to be able to make it in at those 3 minutes, and then you can relax, take some of the stress off of you. Okay, Katarina, who do we have lined up as our readers today?
All right. So if I read your name, but it's not the same name that you have appearing on your screen, I would appreciate if you change your screen name to the name that you're registered under, so that I can find you when I start checking to see who's actually here. Signed up to read are Gregory Harris, Jessica Lucci, Linda Nerny, and I apologize if I mispronounce your names. When you're up to read, please feel free to correct me, because I'm making a best guess and I have an accent layered over taking best guesses here. So Linda Nerny, Deborah Garcia, Anne Lorotti, Christine Irving, Dorothy Randall Gray, Catherine O'Neill, Rosaline Crowley, Janice Alper, Dawn Wright, Jeanette Toomer, Terry Tsagai, Robin Alpern, Alita Saratman, Carol Gomez, Angelica Amador, Ellie Bates, Alicia Velas-Pulius, Andy Penner, Nancy Dimsdale, and Jackie Callum.
Okay, just a quick reminder too, we did start out in this iteration of our open mic online with a waiting list, but we don't have a waiting list anymore. What we have are 20 slots. And when our open mic is listed in our calendar, the registration is open, and feel free, it's first come, first serve. Please feel free to go in and claim your 3 minute slot, one of those 20, anytime that you're ready to claim it. And if they're listed in our calendar at iwwg.wildapricot.org/open mic, that means registration is open and you can sign up for that anytime. And if you can't make it, we do appreciate it if you would cancel and open up your slot for somebody else. Well, we're in the middle of a snowstorm here where I am in the Boston area. And of course, Dolores is as well, and I'm really grateful that we're able to do this online so that I didn't have to get in my car or decide to cancel this today. Thanks for coming at this non-regular time. There's something called the Super Bowl apparently happening tonight. And I think that there are some of you may want to go to that. I also heard maybe Amanda Gorman is going to make an appearance there. So I know some of you might want to be there. We've got some people, Katarina, if you want to grab them from the who are here and waiting to get added as panelists. So Dolores, thank you so much for coming in the snowstorm and being with us today and adjusting the time to come earlier. I want to tell you a little bit about Dolores. She's going to be reading from her memoir, Say I'm Dead. And the I'm going to read you a little bit of background about her memoir and about her. So in 1943, Black Charles and White Ella, Dolores's parents, fled Indiana's anti-race mixing law, city council Klansmen, and a historic lynching. Ella staged her own disappearance, evaded an FBI search, and married in Buffalo, where the couple lived in hiding for 36 years, until Dolores, their adult daughter, questioned who and where the White family were. And following their courageous journeys, we discover a little understood slice of America's racial history. The story moves through the evolution of race mixing, from plantation rapes to a secret marriage never uncovered by the FBI during Jim Crow, to the author's own search for what being half white meant in a Black woman, and ends with her grandson's birth amid today's growth of mixed race births, which outpaced single race births 3-1 from the 2010 census. This timely read delves into a complicated vein of racial reckoning, providing a hopeful view of where race in this country may be headed, while signifying the importance of the Black Lives Matter movement right now. E. Dolores Johnson is the daughter of a Black father and a white mother who married 25 years before the Supreme Court overturned anti-race mixing laws. She's author of their family story, Say I'm Dead, a family memoir of race, secrets, and love, which was given the 2020 Outstanding Literary Award from the National Association of Black Journalists. Her other published essays on mixed race, racism, and identity appeared in Narratively, The Buffalo News, Hippocampus, Pangyris, and others. Dolores consulted on diversity with colleges, corporations, and nonprofits during her business career. A graduate of Howard University and Harvard Business School, she has directed the digitization of John F. Kennedy's archives at his presidential library. She lives in Cambridge. Welcome, Dolores.
Thank you very much, Kelly. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm so happy to be speaking to some writers today.
A lot of writers.
Yeah, right. It's a great opportunity. Maybe we'll get into some writer-led questions later.
Absolutely. Please feel free to put any questions that come up for you towards the end of Dolores's reading in the chat. So I'll refer and ask as many of them as I can get to. Dolores, whenever you're ready, we would love to have you just say what you want to say as an introduction to your reading, and then read, and then we'll have a conversation.
Great. Well, I think that the description you read was quite comprehensive of what Say I'm Dead is all about. I come from a family where for 5 generations, we have defied America's forbidding race mixing norms and laws. And you will hear more about the courageous journeys of the people in my family when you have a chance to hear more about the book. I'm going to start with a reading that takes place when I'm in my 30s. And it's the very first time in my life that my parents tell me their secret. I've grown up without ever knowing that they had run away and hidden from the FBI, and how it was that they chose to do that. It was considered unthinkable when they did it in 1943. This is a conversation over a family meeting, a family dinner that I ambushed into a meeting. And my brother David appears in the conversation. New in town and recently divorced, Charles headed out to Madam C.J. Walker's ballroom in 1942, the place for Indianapolis Negroes to mingle. On a mission to find a nice colored girl to start over with, to marry, he adjusted his tie before following the music upstairs. There he found a tuxedoed band perched on a roulette wheel bandstand, shimmying out the foxtrot couples danced to. He took in the scene from the bar, his eyes flitting from one attractive girl in a fancy dress to another. As he sipped a too expensive shot of bourbon, another fellow eyed his broad shoulders and shined but worn shoes before coming over. See something you like? Yeah, plenty, Charles said. Looky here, Jack. Meeting a girl at Walker's depends on how much you got in your pocket and who your daddy is, see? And if she ain't happy with both, all you're going to get is one dance, if you're lucky. Charles watched smooth-talking men in stylish suits lead those women onto the dance floor, realizing he couldn't make any time there. But since there was no law against watching the well-to-do spectacle, he stayed for a while to hear the jazz and take then his lonely stroll back to his boarding house. Where else was there for a colored man to find a suitable Negro girl? One who was nothing like the wife down in Georgia he had to marry at 17, when she said the baby was his, and afterwards that it wasn't. The girl he wanted wasn't in the churches he tried, just old ladies, married women, and not so pretty singles. And the mother of the one he approached had snatched her away because he was divorced. The girl he was looking for wasn't out Indiana Avenue at the Sunset Terrace either, where the brown sugar went to dance. They were good looking, all right, sporting outfits that clung to their charms with jaunty hats tipped over done-up hair. The ones he talked to sure enough looked like sugar, but their salty invitations tasted too much like his past. On his walk back home, that ladylike girl in the mailroom at work ran through his mind, like always. The white girl, with guts enough to talk to him like a straight-up man. The one whose soft skin he imagined touching, even though the Klan would string up his damn fool self for looking at her, the way they did those two boys just a few years ago. But damn if she wasn't the sweetest woman he had ever met. The day came when Charles snuck down to the mailroom and whispered what he'd practiced in his mirror. I hope I'm not out of line, he said. But I want you to know, I like you very much. She stared at him, weighed his words intently. I've thought of you too, she said. The Negro cabbie asked Ella twice if she was sure of the address, if she wanted the colored side of town. She assured him she did, and when the cab pulled up at his place, Charles was waiting on the sidewalk. As he helped her out, the cabbie turned all the way around to glare at Charles. Man, why you want to mix me up in some mess like this? Just take the dollar, Charles said. You haven't seen a thing, understand? She went into his room at the boarding house and sat in the nicked easy chair as Charles fixed the Coke she asked for, adding a splash of whiskey before pouring a straight one for himself. She raised her glass and made the toast the boys at her acting group taught her. Here's to it and to it again. If you don't do it when you get to it, you'll never get to it to do it again. He liked the life in her eyes, the spirit in her soul. Without it, he realized, she would have never come over here. Charles turned on the radio to a Moody Blues tune. Then a colored announcer came on. Hey, all you cats out there, it's Saturday night. Get your best girl and cut a rug with us where the party keeps a going all night long. He pulled her up to dance, though she protested that she wasn't much good. Ella Fitzgerald was on, a tisket a tasket. And while they tried, neither could follow what the other was doing. She knew the foxtrot with its set patterns, and he knew the country mule, freestyle, They laughed through false turns and stepping on each other's toes, but when a slow tune came on, they did better. Charles folded her into his chest, and she followed his simple steps. In no time, they were cooking dinner together at his place a couple of nights a week. But as they grew into love, Charles began to worry. He didn't think she understood the trouble she could get into for being with him. Did this white girl even know she could be attacked in the street for it? Did she have any idea what she could face for breaking the unwritten Jim Crow codes? Some of the Indianapolis and Marion County elected officials were open members of the Klan. They posed as good guys doing community service like giving away wheelchairs and food to whites only. But did Ella understand that the Grand Wizard, the man named Stevenson, used to run the nationwide Ku Klux from Indianapolis? That they hated Negroes so much that they terrorized and killed them? She didn't know. 2 Negro men got lynched in Marion a few years before he and Ella took up. After a robbery and murder, a white woman claimed rape. The suspected men were locked up briefly until a white mob broke into the jail with sledgehammers and strung them up. Charles saw a picture postcard of the lynching taped up next to the price list in the black barber shop as a warning. On it, a big crowd of men and women milled around brown bodies hanging from trees, their white faces satisfied. The victims' heads bent over their nooses where their necks had broken, their limp legs dangling free. Their bodies are left on display as whites congratulated themselves on delivering vigilante justice. That was the proof, the man in the next barber's chair told Charles, of how the Klan was the law in Indianapolis. Don't take no chances in these parts, he said. Nobody has been called to account. As happened at many lynchings in the United States, studio photographers shot a ghastly picture, then sold thousands of copies, like circus souvenirs, to white people who wanted a keepsake. Charles sat Ella down to explain how it was. Somebody could get the law on him because of their relationship, trump up the charges, throw him in jail, beat him half to death, or lynch him for touching a white woman. And nobody was going to do a thing about it. He was getting pretty scared, and she should be too. Ella had to understand that for her part, the place where they both worked would fire her if they found out. It would be a scandal, and all white people would turn their backs on her. My brother David wiped his brow with the handkerchief he always carried and asked incredulously, You mean this is the first you heard of any of this, Mama? You didn't know? How could you not know? My life had only been in a white community up to then, Mama said. I was completely sheltered from that kind of thing. Negro business wasn't my business, nor anyone's I knew. My family didn't follow politics or race, and even if they had, a lynching wasn't anything to talk to a young lady about. When your father explained all this to me, I had only the slightest idea. Charles wanted Elle to think these risks through before they saw each other again. She had to decide if the risks were worth it. Could she live with her family never knowing about them? To staying alert all the time so they never made that one mistake that would ruin their lives? He took Ella by the shoulders and finally said he loved her so much he was willing to face the dangers. Charles's forehead sweat and his voice dropped deep with desperation when he said he had to be sure she loved him the same way. He pulled her close and stroked her thick curls. Take some time to think hard before you answer me, he said. I mean it. And if you don't come back, I'll understand. Thank you.
Okay, lots of applause. I will add mine. Okay, I want you to keep reading. This is wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much. Very moving, Dolores, very moving opening. And Alicia says, I love how you have explored contemporary themes in this book. I'm eager to read the rest. I will buy. I noticed that a number of people have been saying they're buying the book in the chat room, where I have put the links to this. And so please keep buying today while we're here supporting Dolores and this really beautiful book. Dolores, I found myself really, the first thing I was curious about, and I was completely involved from the beginning of what you were telling me. The setup seemed to be so effective in understanding what Charles's motivation was, where he was coming from, what he was looking for, and how that had been so that it wasn't easy to find what he was, the kind of woman that he wanted to be with. And also the setup is so effective in terms of outlaying the risk and making that really graphic, really so clear and so graphic for us to be in that time when, a souvenir of lynching would be, passed around. And it may still be, I don't know, but this was a very moving opening. And then the excitement of feeling them coming together so instinctively is the storytelling of this is really effective. And I said, I'm curious about, we know that you were having a family meeting with your mother and father, and I think maybe other family members. You said, well, how much of this detail did you imagine, and how much of it is based on maybe what your father or mother said about their meeting? You've got beautiful music playing. You're so great at the scene setting. And I would just love to hear how you approach this as memoir.
Well, when I went home to have the discussion, it was after I had done my father's roots and prepared a genealogy chart. That was the moment that a light bulb went on for me, that I'm 30 some years old. And I just now absorbed the point that my mother is the only white person in my family. She has no roots. And I know that can't be so. She has to be from someone, somewhere. And so when I go home and I say that, look at this chart. We've all got a copy of this chart. We've talked about it. Do you see that something major is missing here? And they all look at me like I'm crazy. And I say, Mama's family is missing. It was a very traumatic weekend. It was the first time that the story I read was revealed to me and my two brothers, who are older than me. So we were all in our 30s. After the conclusion of the story that's written, my mom and I, well, actually before I wrote it, for after that family meeting, we spent years discussing what had gone on in her life before, and what had gone on during the lifetime I lived, never knowing their secret. So there's very little imagined in the book. There's, of course, some sections where in memoir you must imagine it was probably like this. And those are identified in my writing as I imagined it this way, kind of introduction. But this book is very well researched, which is why I got an award from the National Journalist Association, because I went and found that souvenir photograph of the lynching, and it's in the book. I studied a lot of laws. I went up to Harvard Law School and discussed some anti-miscegenation laws. I did a lot of work to create the backdrop in which the personal story is told.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. It's and so as you tell us, if you would, a little bit about how you structured the book and put it together. Like, I know we have other memoir writers who are interested to know and maybe learn from your approach, and we'd also love to just know more about how did you come up with the structure? How did you feel like that was going to work and be effective?
Well, I struggled with the structure. And of course, after I had gotten through the first couple of drafts, each draft I did enrich the book and corrected mistakes, but I was having trouble deciding on the structure. Would it be chronological from the time I was a little girl forward? Would it start with my mom's story? And because the book is really a braided story where I become, I live as a Black woman for 30 some years. When I'm born, my birth certificate says Negro, and there's no acknowledgement of my white biology. And so when I discover this secret in my 30s, my identity is tilted. Like, what does this actually mean? I don't know who my family is, and therefore I don't know who I am all of a sudden. And so the story also goes on to how meeting my white family, searching them out, looking for them and finding them, and then finally having the opportunity to embrace both sides of my heritage, which I had never known or done. Was that the story? So there was a lot of back and forth in creating the structure. And finally, I thought, well, both stories, my mom's and mine, have to be here completely. And what I did was I took every scene in the book and put them on index cards, one scene per card. I made them color coded. There was a color for my mom, a color for me, a color for my grandmother and her mom, who was the subject of a plantation rape, where actually the genesis of all mixed race comes from in this country, white plantation owners raping Black slaves, and goes forward to my daughter, who's an African American married to a white man. And so everybody had their color, and I laid them out in the order I thought I wanted them to be in the book on a big cork board. And then I started switching them around. What if I put this first and that second? No. How about if I make this a flashback and that a seed for the future? So that was how the book was finally constructed. And once I got all that in an order that I thought made the best sense, I looked to see who was getting too much ink or not enough ink. Were there way too many green cards and way too few orange cards? Now go back and hack up the scenes and make it more balanced. So it was, I believe, on my 15th revision that the book got submitted for publication.
Wonderful. I see people applauding. They're happy about that for you. I'm going to encourage any of you who are listening to please type into the chat room now a particular question that you hope that you could ask Dolores here. Sipra asks, very something with the problem of present time. It mirrored not only the individual life, but societal complexity of America as a whole. What are your thoughts on that? I'm intrigued that your father, I'm sorry, I'm seeing two different questions.
Well, shall I address the first one?
Sure.
Yeah, it was very, very important to me to paint the picture of race in America, not only how it evolved through the generations of my family, but what does it mean today? And in the George Floyd riots, when the racial consciousness in America rose a notch, I was able to, in the book talks that I've given, show what's in the book from some time in the past and how it manifests today. So, for example, there's a passage in the book, after I've discovered my white family and we've had some time together, I start to now dig around in the genealogy on the white side. And what I'm able to do is compare what was going on in my white family at the same time what was going on in my Black family. And it illustrates how immigrants came from Europe, built businesses, became successful, purchased property, and so forth, at the same time that my African-American ancestors were slaves, sharecroppers, subject to Jim Crow laws where they couldn't get a job or get paid or buy any property, and then tie that to the economic gap that exists today, showing the cumulative impact of the growth of wealth and the lack of income that you can see every day in news stories and in your towns and conversations with others. Black people have very little, white people have much more. And There was a study done by the Boston Globe on racism in Boston that had 7 parts. One was an economic disparity type of approach. And they stated that the typical Black family in Boston had a net worth of $8. $8. And the typical white family in Boston has a net worth of $245,000. And that passage in my book is only one of the ways that I am able to show what happened to my family and how it manifests today.
Thank you. There are a couple questions coming in, so I'm going to jump over to those, Dolores. Robin is asking, I'm intrigued that your father was first concerned about the risk to your mother, and only after that does he describe the risk to himself. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, my father and his family, what they called escaped from Georgia in the 1930s. That was the period of the Great Migration when Black people saw that there were factory jobs opening up for them in the North, and they didn't have to live under the blatant, all-out, hostile, brutal, dangerous racism of the South. He already knew the risks. Every Black man knew they weren't to be involved with a white woman. They knew they could be lynched or beaten or jailed. Every Black man knew that. But my mother, okay, here's another interesting tie between then and now. My mother says, I didn't know anything about all of that because Negro business was never our business. Now, when we had the George Floyd riots last summer, there were so many conversations where white people were saying, I had no idea Black people were treated this way by the police. I had no idea of all of these racist behaviors in institutional behavior and thinking. I had no idea how embedded racism is in the thought process that Americans have. Isn't that the same conversation from 1942? Negro business is not my business.
Yeah.
My father knew that she didn't understand. He could see it. And the fact that she was so open to being with him, he had to warn her because she didn't know what she was getting into.
And clearly she decided to go ahead, and we find out more about that in your book. There's another question from Andy. She says, what precipitated your knowing, Dolores, that you would write the initial draft of your memoir? At what point did you bookend the scope of it, what to leave in, what to leave out? She loves the idea of your green and orange index cards. So when did you know you would draft your memoir?
I was working in a job that had to do with mid-career journalists who were quite successful. And I'm a lifelong learner. I'm always interested in learning something new. And there were classes going on in this program called narrative journalism. And the technique is used widely as reporters put stories together now. It's not a technique that we had, say, in the Walter Cronkite days, which was just the facts. Narrative journalism is where you tell a story and the facts. The story is always centered on a person who lived the experience that the article is about. So whether it's a health insurance or nursing homes or Rust Belt jobs or whatever it might be, they always start with Joe Blow who lost his job and the factory closed and now they're gone. As I sat in those classes and got to know the journalists, we talked about my background and they said to me, you should write a book. I had never thought of writing a book. I was in business all my life. And that's a very analytical way to spend your time. And I had never developed the creative side of my brain. So I sat down and tried to write the book when so many of them who had written books urged me to. And I gave it to a writing professor at Lesley College to take a look at. And she gave it back to me and she said this, Dolores, what you have here is a business report. You don't know anything about writing a creative story. You need to go back to school. And, that was some years before the book was published. I did go back to Grub Street and take their memoir incubator, where they taught me everything that you see in that book.
Yes. Yeah. So you mentioned Grub Street. It wouldn't be familiar to anyone probably outside of New England, but for those of you who aren't, it's like the Guild, except it's all in one place. It has a physical presence, and you actually go and you take classes there. So
They're all online now, and they're taking students from all over anywhere. So it's an excellent creative writing center.
So tell us, if you would, a little bit about, well, someone is asking a question that I think relates to one of the questions I wanted to ask you. She's asking, Wendy's asking about, you have to have nowadays an important story to tell, and you've done a beautiful job crafting it. But in today's world of publishing, there's a lot of discussion about needing a following, social media platform with followers. So she's asking, did you submit to an agent or an indie publisher? And I know you may want to mention that you had this wonderful sort of inner group, this collegial group with Molly and with Michelle as they brought their books out. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about your own process with sort of bringing this baby out into the world.
Well, I would urge the writers who are joined here with us today to always think about having a writing group. Other writers who are your peers that have, essentially the same skill level that you do, that you can discuss your work with. I often trade papers with other writers. Can you look at this piece and tell me what you think? What do you see here? What would you change? What doesn't make any sense? And I got that from Grub Street, because once I finished that one-year program, I continued editing my book, revising my book, and we were able to support each other, who were all trying to get published. And that helped me a great deal to improve my story. And Grub Street also has this literary conference every year called the Muse. And in your cities, you probably have literary conferences, or some in your region. And
we actually have a Guild one. We have our own.
Okay, right. And it was there I submitted a part of the manuscript for review by an agent, and she offered to represent me. So I would tell you that having an agent makes all the difference in the world, because I didn't really understand what that relationship was all about, but the agent is the go-between on the business end. And let me tell you that publishing is all about business and money. Yeah. I had one agent that I interviewed with tell me that really he didn't care what the story was about. He just wanted to know if he could sell 30,000 copies at $28 a piece. Yeah. Which was so disheartening when you've poured your soul and your family's story onto the page. But the agent, you select your agent according to what their specialty is. So if you write cookbooks, don't go with somebody who is looking for sci-fi.
Right. And we actually, Dolores, I think that's so helpful. And I do see that there are more questions than what we're going to have time for that are emerging. And if you feel like answering any of them in the chat room afterwards, you may. And we totally agree with you about the agents. And we have integrated a model of having agents at our annual conferences and some of our regional conferences. And we have courses in marketing and book publishing, of course, as well. And but this whole idea of that collegiality, that sisterhood, or working closely with others, yes, it's about community. It really is so much about community. I had one other quick question that I wanted to ask you, which has to do with, and before we wrap up, which really has to do with the emotional impact on the family, Dolores, and how you navigated that, because I'm just curious. You are going to write a memoir. How did you cope or respond or navigate the impact on the family, with sort of whether you needed a sense of permission or involvement or approval, whatever? I'm just curious about how you navigated that.
That's an essential question whenever you think about memoir. And, you know, the first thing I say is you have to decide how important existing relationships are to you. And then you write according to that. If you are uncomfortable stirring up a hornet's nest, memoir may not be for you because everybody's got secrets in their closet. And there are lots of things people don't want told. For example, in my book, my mom's best friend, once she got established in her marriage and she lived in a community that was a Black community, she met other white women married to Black men. And her best friend from that group led a double life. She came from Ohio from an extremely racist family, and she had a Black husband and 3 very dark brown children. She told her family that she was single, but she went home and left her kids, even for holidays like Easter, in order to go and be with her family. Never for 65 years saying that she had that family. She would drive around with her kids laying on the floor in the backseat of her car so people wouldn't see that she had Black kids. And I went to that family. My mom's friend had died at the time I started writing the book. And I sat down with her kids who were my age. I grew up with them as, you know, cousins, and asked them if I could write that story because I didn't want to damage that relationship, but I felt that it was essential to include in order to tell what price people had to pay to cross the color line for love. My mom ran away and hid for 36 years, and this woman led a double life. And so there's a lot of tears and a lot of bleeding on the keyboard in writing memoir. People have to understand that if they want to do a truthful, impactful story.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Oh, Dolores, you've got a big pack of people here interested in hearing more and in getting your book and being more enlightened by your really beautiful, generous story. And we thank you so much for sharing it with us today and telling us so much about your own process as well. So thank you.
Well, it's been my pleasure, and I hope that I'll be able to see the chat and maybe respond to some of the other questions. Good luck to all of you who are writing. Ever onward.
And thank you so much, Dolores. And so I'm going to, whenever you're ready, you could just mute yourself in case you're going to jump back in and say something. And I'm going to remind everybody that I have put Dolores's contact information, her website, and the places where you can purchase her book again in the chat room. And I'll probably put it in one more time. But for now, Katerina, I'm going to turn off I'm going to stop our recording and oops.